just wanna make you sweat. I wanna make you sweat. I just wanna make you sweat. I wanna make you sweat. Sweat, sweat.
Greetings, welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. It's been a while since I've talked to you all. As some of you know, it's snowed in the area, and so lots of us in the Northern Virginia area had been homebound. So this is a great time to record a show. I actually had a chance to work on my all sorts of things I needed to catch up on. And anyway, we are really privileged to have Anthony joining us again. He's quickly becoming one of my favorite people to hang out with. And backstage, we get to talk about all sorts of things like cars, especially, and just all sorts of things. And it's just really fun. So we've actually sort of known each other kind of through the comment section of my YouTube channel, but finally we've had a chance to connect. So Anthony, it's great seeing you. And just let me know if there's anything you want to talk about, but we agreed backstage that we'll just kind of surf the internet a little bit to see some of the questions that people posed, and we would review it, and I'll invite Anthony to comment, and we'll just sort of ad lib for the next hour. So Anthony, while I try to bring this up, any thoughts?
I'm glad that I'm quickly becoming one of your favorite people to hang out with. That's a thought. That's something that crossed my head right there. I love being on the channel, and I love having conversations with you. And I like going over all the creation evolution stuff too, because I followed the channel for so long because of that, and now I get to be a much more direct part of it.
And there's people know me through the Evidence and Reasons channel primarily through my involvement in the creation evolution controversy. And it is difficult for me to be focused on that, because there's other parts of my life that I really like to share that, it's just like, well, I probably will kind of confuse people about the mission of the channel. For example, we were just talking about anime. Somehow we were talking about history, and I was talking about George Washington and how inspiring that was. And that led to a conversation about an anime character, or I don't know if you call it anime, a character named Commander Irwin in Attack on Titan.
Yeah, an Attack on Titan. Yeah, Commander Irwin, Attack on Titan.
And we watched a few clips of that, and he had this great speech. And so we were coming up with lines from kind of our favorite fiction. And so one of the lines that I came up with was Captain Kirk, who said, "Risk is our business." And so sometimes when I'm afraid, we have faced challenges in life where we have to take risks just to survive. It's just like, if you're just in the hunter-gatherer days, it's like, well, you take a risk when you go out there in the wilderness to hunt. You never know what you might encounter. And but if you didn't go out there and hunt and gather, you might not have food. So you're forced to take risk. And really, for everyone, to some extent, risk is our business. Now, there was a line you gave about something about desperate measures. I like that one.
Yeah, it's from the game Halo 3 ODST. And one of the characters says, "Desperate times calls for desperate measures." And then the leader of the group of it, in the game you play as, he comes and he says, "We are the desperate measures."
Yes, we were talking about, I think the theme is there's so few of us. We are so outnumbered in the creation evolution controversy. We had been. It's changing now. That sometimes not really the best qualified people were articulating the creation evolution, the creation side. And we're just outnumbered by academia and all the researchers. We're having a little hang up there. Sorry about that. Definitely we were suffering desperate measures, but even still to this day, even though we're moving forward, it's people like us that are helping move the needle. We're not, as it says in Corinthians, not many of us are wise, not many of us are noble. You know, God has chosen the least things of the world to shame the wise and the powerful. I'm like, yeah, that's us. So that being said, glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, because what I do see happening is God has structured the world such that no matter how clever someone can argue, at some point, if the facts aren't on your side, it's not going to make a difference. And that's what always we have going for us, even though we're not in positions of influence to the level of like the present culture. We don't have the resources. The facts are on our side. And even if we don't have the most articulate ways to articulate things, we're getting there and the facts are on our side. And I'm actually hopeful things will move forward. So we were going to talk about improbability arguments and intelligent design, but I wasn't able to. I was so busy today, I wasn't able to get around to finishing that. So I said, why don't we just kind of surf the internet and see the questions that creationists and intelligent design proponents have posed, where they're hung up on, and see some of my responses, and then we'll just discuss those responses. And you know, part of this is to help me practice to be more effective in communicating answers succinctly and effectively. So let me start pulling that up. While I pull that up, if you have you participated on internet forums at all, or?
Yes, boy, have I. Now I stayed away from Reddit, not necessarily for any particular reason. I mean, I always heard Reddit was a cesspool, and that does seem to be true whenever I do go there. But definitely on places like YouTube and Facebook, I've had lengthy discussions and debates over a variety of topics, everything from, you know, fictional arguments over fiction to the creation evolution debate to, you know, just different issues of matter of fact. Just so I definitely have.
So are those forums anywhere? Are they easy to access, or are they Discord servers or Facebook?
I mean, I could technically pull up some on my Facebook or on my YouTube profile, but honestly, it's one of the things where I just kind of wait for somebody to respond to me, and I get a notification, and then I just respond in kind at the time, because it's, you know, it's a little easier than me trying to remember every discussion I've had.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I do have to go back and reread what I've said before, because somebody will respond to me weeks later, and I'll be like, what did I say? And then I have to go reread it. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm back on track.
Well, I think an appropriate use of Reddit for a creationist is not to promote creationism directly through the channel, but only indirectly. It's a place to extend your thought process and practice. It's batting practice. It's great to have lots of batting practice. People in professional sports, especially like in football, you might be on the playing field for 2 hours, but the rest of the time you're actually practicing to prepare you for the big game. And in fact, they're going to be preparing 2 weeks for the upcoming Super Bowl. So Reddit is a really good place. The internet in general is a good place to practice your arguments, to see how well and effective you could be. Sometimes you'll get some. Most of the time, it got to be half the time. It's not just dealing with the facts. It's recognizing very deceptive arguments, dishonest, disingenuous, you name it. And sometimes the creationists will not recognize it, and they just keep going down these trails, and they're basically decoyed into stupid arguments, and they're not seeing it. I'm just like, look, you're totally wasting your time on this. So hopefully this will be a good exercise to cut through So let me just show one particular Reddit forum. One is Our Creation. So some of the questions are like, is the moon natural or created? There's some that are kind of funny. Oh my goodness. This one's like the strange intellect of an atheist. So we have something like an engine here. This has a designer, and the atheist said this is by chance. That's not exactly there's a little bit of artistic license in that, but yeah, that's exactly it. And we can get to that too. There were some really good ones. Let me see if they had one really. There were some that were really good. I don't know if I found one. Oh, here's one. Here's a whole bunch of scientists. Let me see if I can make this bigger. Open image. See if I can make this a little bigger. And so it says, here are these scientists says, if I can just synthesize life here, then I'll have proven that no intelligence was necessary to form life in the beginning. I like that one. Okay, so now let me see if I can go to some of the other ones. Shrink. So I do apologize. This has ordered it a little differently than I'd seen it earlier. Okay, let me see if I can. Oh, wait. Do you have any thoughts while if you can add some filler while I'm trying to comb through this? I do apologize.
The right there, that is the moon natural or created one. I mean, I think I know what they're getting at, but it's a very oddly phrased question for me, because it almost seems to be asking it as if the moon could be independently natural or created as opposed to the Earth. You know, not that both are, created or natural.
Okay, here's one that I spent some time this morning trying to address. So this commenter, he's a creationist or creationist leaning, Komitraza. He asked, what caused the apparent monopoly of materialistic atheistic ideas in modern scientific circles? And he just comments, it is more of a sociological historical question. But if we look at the general environment in most scientific communities and societies today, there seems to be a growing trend toward materialism, methodological naturalism, and atheism from the 19th century onward till now. Prior scientists and natural philosophers, on the other hand, were mostly inclined toward creationism and theism, or at least you could say they were a significant fraction of the group. That is true, by the way. What happened / changed in Europe? Go ahead.
I was just saying Newton.
Interrupt anytime.
Some of the biggest. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't.
No, go ahead, and I'll just.
I was just saying that Newton's shining example of that. Somebody who we couldn't have modern science without. Definitionally a creationist.
Well, having gone through an academic program, even taking just freshman chemistry and sophomore level physics, when you go through the book and it's like, this is Boyle's law, or Dalton discovered this. So obviously Newton was named in so much of the physics and also in calculus, but every major name, I'd say 90% of the major names, all the basic science, these are Christians, and uniquely Christians, not many of them. I mean, Newton wasn't exactly an Orthodox Christian, but he was a Bible believer. So just let me, I think the last time we might have talked about Faraday, Michael Faraday. No, it was someone else. We wouldn't have the abundance of modern electricity because Michael Faraday figured out how to build generators. And he is credited with Faraday's law of induction, which is the third of four of Maxwell's equations of electrodynamics. Speaking of Maxwell, we wouldn't have radio waves if it weren't for his insights and our understanding of the connection of electricity, magnetism, and optics and radio waves. That's in microwave ovens, etc. That's Maxwell. So right there, much of our understanding of the mechanical aspects of the universe is Newton. We're able to put satellites in orbit, in part because of Newton, and then also people like Kepler, who devised celestial mechanics, and then electricity and anything, with remote communication, that would be Faraday and Maxwell. So you've got it's like, this is definitely a myth that they're saying religion has hampered science. It actually motivated it. And to understand the mindset the mindset was that if God is the creator and the designer, there's some expectation the universe has some orderly laws by which it's organized. And what we take for granted as laws of physics, that was not necessarily the view most of the time. That the Christians believe that in all of this chaos, there must be a lawful organization. And that's what we're finding. And that inspired people. The other thing is, if God is the designer, people will say, well, then if God did it, why would you be interested? And I'm just like, no. If a genius built something, wouldn't that motivate you more to study what he created? If you have any thoughts, then we'll continue.
You pretty much spelled out everything that I was going to say about it. It really is the deal of the idea of a law of physics is very uniquely a Christian stemmed idea. Most cultures and peoples would not have thought that the universe operates in any sort of an orderly manner before that. Like the one thing that comes to mind is just like, why wasn't the scientific enlightenment from the Chinese? Because they're brilliant. They're a brilliant nation with a lot of feats throughout their history. And it's because for all that brilliance, most of them never considered that the world would have an order of laws behind it, that the world would have to operate in a certain way. They just figured that the forces of nature do what they will whenever they will.
Well, okay, this is really, what I like. Okay, Google AI is not always 100% accurate. Matter of fact, because I have slight prediabetes, I'm trying to come up with recipes that eliminate table sugar from the recipe. So even when you buy store-bought bread, it has tons of sugar in it. Not tons, but enough that makes me kind of concerned. Or pancake mix. So I was just Googling how to make pancakes with something other than Bisquick. And I knew the recipes couldn't be quite right. But that being said, just to show that what Anthony and I are saying is not so far off to left field. What Google AI can do is at least revealed that there is a reasonable consensus by scholars. And I'm going to show that about what we said. So let's just view this. I said Alfred North Whitehead, famous mathematician and philosopher, and a scholar of history. Alfred North Whitehead is not a Christian. That's also significant. So the Google term, I put Alfred North Whitehead, Christianity and Science. By the way, Alfred North Whitehead was Bertrand Russell's mentor. Bertrand Russell is a famous atheist who wrote the essay, Why I'm Not a Christian. By the way, despite the fact Russell is not a Christian, I really I love Bertrand Russell. There are some atheists that I'm just broken over because they're just like such wonderful people, but they weren't Christian. Anyway, Alfred North Whitehead. So the Google answer is, AI says this: Alfred North Whitehead viewed Christianity and science not as opposing forces, but as complementary, with the former proving the rational, orderly, and purposeful worldview essential for the development of modern science. He argued that the medieval belief in a rational God fostered the necessary conviction that the universe is predictable and can be understood. Key aspects of Whitehead's view on Christianity and science include theological roots of science. Whitehead asserted that modern science is a byproduct of medieval theology, which, by emphasizing a rational God, gave scientists the belief that nature is ordered and predictable. Complementary truths. He viewed science as dealing with the general quantitative conditions of nature, while religion focuses on ultimate values, meaning, and purpose. Mutual modification. Whitehead argued that science and religion should not be in conflict, but rather science can help refine religious doctrines, allowing them to adapt and evolve to the benefit of both. And I'm skipping a little bit. Call for coexistence. He believed that religion must embrace change in the same manner as science to maintain its relevance. Ultimately, Whitehead believed that a mature understanding of reality requires integrating scientific knowledge with religious insights, moving beyond fragmented viewpoints toward a more holistic, process-oriented understanding of God and the world. That's very compelling. Now, unfortunately, some of the hostility between science and religion has been done by the religion side, particularly elements of evangelical Christianity. I'm sorry to say that. I know it at a personal level because given who I am and who I've worked for, you would think that the congregations I had been a part of would be wanting me to teach more about God as it's revealed in creation. I've basically been politely, excluded from teaching. So they'll say, yeah, one day we'll do it. They never get around to it. But then they'll have all these other topics talking about stuff that people would rather forget, that they could actually learn on their own probably better. I'm sorry. I have a lot of sour grapes from what I've seen. And I have to say this, a pastor recently, I was sharing, one way to reach the young is to talk about evidence for the Christian faith in personal testimonies, in archaeology, and in science. And he said, well, not for our congregation. That's fringe and tangential. And I was like, okay, it's very clear that there's hardly anyone in the age range. There's no one in the age range between 15 and 35 in our church. They're all old. And I'm like, okay, this is exactly what I'm trying to help you fix. And your attitude, Mr. Pastor, is, I'm around people in that age range and even slightly younger. And you're saying they're telling me what they feel they need to hear. And I've worked on that. And what do you do, Mr. Pastor? And you say those topics are fringe and tangential. You're basically writing off an entire generation of people with that. So anyway, we'll continue on. I could see that Anthony had to attend to something. So let's continue on with the Reddit exploration. And so there has been a divide between Christianity and science. Part of it definitely is the atheists attacking religion, but then people within Christianity have not exactly helped. They've often given a very chilly reception to scientists. They are not valued. They're anyone who's not many times a pastor or evangelist or whatever, a seminarian, you're treated as like a third-rate citizen. And sometimes in the culture, they especially despise scientists. I'm sorry to say that. Even in my own congregation, I could just hear them say, kind of the hostility towards science and education. So if you have any thoughts, Anthony, and we'll just continue on with Reddit shortly.
A lot of that hostility comes from the fact that they sort of bought what the materialists were selling, that science is antithetical to religion, and they figured, well, we better keep it away from us then.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake on their part. That was a mistake on, and part of it's hard to gripe them on because there was some really dark hours there. But it's just one of those things where it's like, it's a little weird that you even continued to believe it at that point. Because part of why I'm such a firm believer in Christianity is because I see it bore out in reality.
Yep.
I wouldn't want it. There's a scene from Polar Express. You remember that old movie Polar Express?
I've never saw it.
You never saw it? It's a Christmas movie. It's about Santa Claus, but there's a scene from it that really rings true when it kind of comes to this topic. The kid's talking to this, I'll call him a mystical vagrant because he's got a lot of like very mysterious qualities about him. He's on top of the train and he's not supposed to be there kind of thing. He's looking for his friend and he runs into that vagrant. The vagrant's talking to him about a bunch of stuff and he talks to him and they're talking about Santa Claus at the moment, but it really is pertinent to, I guess, how a lot of Christians have to feel in the face of the academic, materialist, atheistic bias that we run into. People, the kid says, I want to believe, and then the vagrant chimes in, he's like, but you don't want to be swindled, bamboozled, have the wool pulled over your eyes, and there's a lot of them like that. Yeah. And, that's exactly, I relate to that. And part of why I am faithful is because I see enough evidence to where it's like, I don't think I'm being bamboozled. I don't think I'm just getting empty platitudes served to me.
Yes. So there was sadly there was also a shift in intellectual leadership and educational leadership. It used to be the Christians were at the top of the educational ladder. All your best scholars, not just in science, but in every field, were Christians. Somewhere around the 19th century, that started to change, and there was a very anti-education. It tended to promote ignorance. There is a historian, Mark Knoll, who'd studied this, and I'm just like, I have to agree because I saw it matriculate down to evangelical culture, where the attitude is all you need to know is the Bible. And I'm like, well, how do you know the Bible? How can you understand the Bible because the Bible talks about so many like events and places and personalities. You can't really understand the Bible unless you understand like things like archaeology and then have a deeper understanding of human nature. Like I think as flawed as psychology, the field is, there's so much to learn. And there's so much about God's creation. It says in the Old Testament, especially, I'll declare the works of God. How can you declare the works of God if you don't even understand what they are? And so there was this anti-intellectualism. There was a time when I was a young Christian, like 40 years ago. And I was in college, and they're saying, "Why are you going to college? You ought to be out there trying to convert people." And I was like, yeah, just be obnoxious and look like you're totally clueless. People aren't going to regard you well. I mean, I can't imagine a more damaging thing to do the gospel than to not show any concern to try to learn where people are and what they're having to deal with. So part of going through academia is actually to walk in the steps of other people and show you're willing to suffer what they're willing to suffer. And they might give you then a little bit better audience. So anyway, sorry to pontificate. So this has been already, I could see this is going through Reddit, so a way to stimulate conversation. So anyway, so the question was, what caused the apparent monopoly of materialistic atheistic ideas in modern scientific circles? And we talked about how it used to be that prior scientists were Christians, and then Komitraza says, what happened / changed in your opinion to cause this dramatic shift, which is even apparent in the current power structure of scientific academia and mass education in general, where careers get destroyed if creationism, theism gets overtly displayed or discussed by those few espousing these ideas in their scientific communities. How has this takeover happened? And I actually didn't answer the question directly. I kind of wanted to cut through the chase in terms of why especially having nearly left the Christian faith, I had to kind of give what I felt the fundamental reason was. And this is what I said, and it's not the most well-written. I'll read through it and then we could talk about it. I said, I misspelled this. There are a number of reasons, and I'll first give a theological Christian reason. It says in Isaiah 45:15, quote, surely you are a God who hides himself. And in Proverbs 25:2, quote, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to search out a matter. And Jesus said, quote, wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat, end quote. So first of all, in the Christian version of intelligent design and creationism, God makes it easy for people who want to deny him to deny him, but somewhat difficult, though not impossible, for people to find evidence of him, if they are willing to search out the evidence. Many attribute the rise of science as such a powerful explanation for everything that people presumed we can explain all phenomenon in terms of the laws of physics and then not have any need of miracles. So at best, one such believer in physics might be a deist. Darwinism pretended to be a physical theory and tried to explain the appearance of design through stupid, brain-dead Darwinian processes. And people believed for a long time, and many still do, that Darwinism was a scientific explanation for the appearance of design. Changing the subject a little bit, I said, God could, for example, make his existence as brutally obvious as the air we breathe, but he has chosen to hide himself. I believe he has done this to test people who really want to follow him versus those that don't. Quote, for the Lord your God is testing you to see whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. Deuteronomy 13:1-3. Richard Dawkins was asked what he, Dawkins, would ask God on Judgment Day if Dawkins found out there was a God after all. Dawkins is a famous atheist. Dawkins would say, why did you, that is God, why did you take such great pains to hide yourself? End quote. And the Bible does teach that God does hide himself, Isaiah 45:15, but that his existence is revealed in the things that are made, Romans 1:18-20. That would be the creation, what we see in creation as marks of God. The reason God hides himself is for his glory to humiliate people like Dawkins in the final day, and that God is testing to see those who desire him versus those who want nothing to do with him. For the kingdom of heaven is hidden in a field. Matthew 13:44. God has played a game of hide and seek. So Kamatraza responded, he said, "Thank you for your beautiful answer, Mr. Salvador. I do also believe it is all part of the wisdom and mystery of God's plan that things be such way. And the limited freedom granted to man and to the devil for deceiving people might also play a role in the state of affairs. Although sometimes it gets a bit disappointing to see seeing the current situation, it is always a comfort and inspiration to see that there still are and always be people, even if few in number, who would not abandon the honest search for truth and declare it without fear of opposition or ridicule." And so we are the desperate measures. We're the few. Do you have any thoughts?
I was going to add to it. There's actually a very pertinent, could I even call it theological? I mean, it deals with theology, but a theological reason why God would not only prefer to hide himself to see who seeks after him, but why it becomes necessary. And it's kind of like the parable of the king who, or the crown prince, sometimes as a king, sometimes as a crown prince, who disguises himself as a poor beggar to see if anybody would like him for him and not just for his power and not just for his riches. If God was as apparent as the air we breathe, our free will would mean very little, at least in respect to obeying him, because you would just always be at the mercy of like, well, there he is. I have the freedom technically to disobey him and do whatever I want, but what kind of a fool's errand is that? And so, if everybody throughout all time and all places were just constantly under, God's eye of Sauron of some kind, they would basically just love him out of a matter of practicality and not out of a matter of any sort of genuine search for truth or genuine love or anything like that. Which, that's not to say that everybody genuinely loves God. Part of why he needed to save us is because we're desperate in our wickedness. So, that has to be factored in. But I think my point's getting across.
Yes. I mean, atheists will, they'll often say, "Why doesn't he just show up?" And I'm like, okay, I'd actually say that's a very good question. And I would just have to respond. I said, well, it does sort of make sense that he'll hide himself a little bit and give you the opportunity to close your eyes. Because one reason it was hard to be an atheist prior to Darwin was design was all over the place. Richard Dawkins, that famous atheist, you know who he is. He said it was hard to be an atheist before the time of Darwin. So even if you didn't have God being as evident as the air you breathe, if you just even thought about all the design in nature, it was hard to run away from that. And Darwin made it possible for people to actually think they had a scientific explanation. They were deceived into thinking they had an actual scientific explanation. And so that was one of my responses. Now, one of my haters obviously didn't like my answer. And let me share what he had to say. And you'll see how I put him down pretty fast. So this guy, Rory, not applicable. Rory is some infamous philosopher, nasty guy, depending on your perspective, that is. And so Rory, one of my detractors, says, yes, I'm lying because I don't agree with your worldview. Love how you also describe Darwinism. I'm assuming you mean modern synthesis, as if no one believes it anymore except some fringe group, like the entire worldwide body of science. So if you want me to unpack that, I can. So Darwinism, another name for it, form of it, I mean, is neo-Darwinism. Neo-Darwinism added Mendelian inheritance to Darwinism, and they coined it neo-Darwinism, which they called modern synthesis. And he's saying that the entire worldwide body of science believes it. That's what he's asserting. And so I put him down pretty hard. He said, like the entire worldwide body of science believes, Darwinism is believed by the entire worldwide body of science. And I say, not true. And I give him citations. The number one evolutionary biologist, Eugene Koonin, says, modern synthesis is gone. He's an evolutionary biologist. Modern synthesis is neo-Darwinism. Neo-Darwinism is gone. I gave him a citation, and just for the the viewers' benefit, that citation is this one. Eugene Koonin, when was it published? 2010, November 1st. So this is already 15 years old. He's saying it's gone. And just so you could see that I'm not joking you, the summary of the state of, okay, this is the number one evolutionary biologist in the world. By his H index, number of publications, citations, etc. Eugene Koonin. He says, the summary of the state of affairs on the 150th anniversary of the origin is somewhat shocking. In the post-genomic era, all major tenets of the modern synthesis are, that is neo-Darwinism, all the major tenets of neo-Darwinism are, if not outright overturned, replaced by a new and incomparably more complex vision of the key aspects of evolution. So, not to mince words, the modern synthesis, aka neo-Darwinism, is gone. So I flushed him down the toilet with that, but I have even more. Evolutionary biologist Masatoshi Nei said Darwin never proved his claims. And you could see this here, and just for the reader's benefit, famous evolutionary biologist Nei says Darwin never proved natural selection is the driving force of evolution, because it isn't. And I wrote, Masatoshi Nei is an evolutionary biologist who was promoted to America's most prestigious scientific association, namely the National Academy of Sciences. He was also awarded one of Japan's highest honors, the Kyoto Prize in Basic Sciences. He taught in an Ivy League school, that's University of Pennsylvania. His MEGA, Molecular Evolutionary Genetics Analysis software, was one I used in biology grad school. I actually used this software. And there is something called neutral theory of evolution, which is non-Darwinian. It says the neutral theory of molecular evolution holds that most evolutionary changes occur at the molecular level, and most of the variation within and between species are due to random genetic drift of alleles that are selectively neutral. And there, I cited the papers, and there's this thing called the neutral theory of evolution, which is non-Darwinian, and that's what Masatoshi Nei subscribes to. And I'll just read a little bit. So I gave a link to this Discover Magazine article published March 15, 2014. I'm going to skip some parts. In a cavernous concert hall before an eager audience of thousands, Masatoshi Nei is experiencing a technical glitch. The biologist has just received Japan's prestigious Kyoto Prize in Basic Sciences, honoring his groundbreaking exploration of evolution on a molecular level. The eyes and ears of international media, diplomats, and dignitaries, including Japan's Princess Takamado, are trained on the soft-spoken 82-year-old as he delivers his acceptance speech. It talks about his work. Let's see. Practicality has been, however, a guiding force throughout Nei's career. From his early agricultural research to his decades-long quest to move evolutionary biology away from subjective field observations into objective math-based analysis on a molecular level. In 1972, he devised a now widely used formulas, Nei's standard genetic distance, which compares key genes of different populations to estimate how long ago the groups diverged. In the early 90s, Nei was co-developer of free software, which I used, that creates evolutionary trees based on genetic data. 2 decades later, Molecular evolutionary genetics analysis, or MEGA, remains one of the most widely used and cited computer programs in biology. And but it is his natural selection busting theory, which Ney developed in the 80s and expanded in the 2013 book Mutation Driven Evolution, that the researcher wants to see embraced, cited, and taught in schools. Darwin said evolution occurs by natural selection in the presence of continuous variation, but he never proved the occurrence of natural selection in nature. He argued but he didn't present strong evidence. That is Darwin, argued that, but he didn't present strong evidence. But among the people working on evolution, most of them still believe natural selection is the driving force. And we won't go that much farther into it. I'll give you time to comment. Just let me finish this up. Michael Lynch showed that Darwinism works backward from the way Darwin claimed, as in, quote, natural selection, aka stupid, brain-dead Darwinian processes, are expected to favor simplicity over complexity. Neutral evolution isn't Darwinism, and neutral evolution dominates at the molecular level as a matter of principle. Anyone can Google neutral theory of evolution, see the Wikipedia article. You can tell I'm not BSing you. That's the truth. Recently, evolutionary biologist Brett Weinstein said, modern Darwinism is broken. My colleagues are lying to themselves. And then Jerry Coyne, eminent evolutionary biologist, he lamented. He said, in science's pecking order, evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom, far closer to phrenology than to physics. And I just piled on a little bit more, and I said, I'm a student of physics, and those are my views. If you have some thoughts now and questions, anything I can clarify?
I'll just say that I think, is it Masatoshi Ney? Is that how his name is?
Ney.
I think that he is completely right in terms of that. It always made sense that obviously to do any kind of evolution, you have to make the smallest change possible at a time, within a margin, because otherwise you just kill the organism. You can't just change wholesale genetics at any given point. Well, the issue there is that if your change is so small, it's not big enough to be selectable against the happenstance of life.
Yeah.
If it's not big enough to be selectable against the happenstance of life, then it doesn't matter if you get a good or a bad mutation. It's just going to be, it's not going to get selected. And it's either going to get, in the case of sexual species, recombinated away or fixated just at random. You're not going to be able to build anything because of the inselectability of it. Whatever mutation occurs has to be bigger than happenstance. If it's not bigger than happenstance, it can't be selected.
Okay, just to describe this for the viewers, suppose you have two individuals, and this is true of mammalian species. We're not talking microbial species that have, when you have small populations, it's exactly as Anthony is saying, chance can actually dominate. So let's say you have some individual that has all the most desirable qualities: intelligence, strength, health, and he gets struck by lightning. So much for that. And he just happened to be the one rare individual that had all those traits. So that's an example where, especially if he was the only individual with those special traits, and he gets struck by lightning, oh well, it's gone. And that can happen. Another case is where you have two individuals. One is very fast. He can run very fast. He's not that smart. And then the other guy is real smart, but he can't run that fast. A lion comes along. Who's gonna get eaten? The really smart guy. Whereas in Darwin's view, he said natural selection is, always preserving that which is good and disposing of that which is bad. And just like, look, did you ever bother thinking about scenarios like that, where chance can override even good qualities? And as we actually started to survey more specific scenarios, when we started to count the population and the possible number of traits because our genome is huge. It has 20,000, at least 20,000 coded proteins, maybe 500,000 isoforms. That is so many traits. And if you just try to figure this out, you realize, oh my goodness, random chance could even be worse than we thought. It's very, the only time this so-called brain-dead Darwinian process works very effectively if it's a trait that is life or death. Absolutely life or death in a particular environment. But other than that, what about all these other traits? Like so in the case of the individual that was fast but not so smart, it's a life or death thing in that one particular circumstance. But intelligence should still be a good trait, but it ends up interfering where the guy who's smart but doesn't run quite as fast, oh well, that trait's gone. And we actually start running it through the models. It's like, oh, a lot of this is actually neutral. Effectively, the proper term is effectively neutral.
To make it even more nuanced, because somebody might say, okay, well, in cases of extreme differentiation in chance, such as lightning or a lion with a fast versus smart guy, okay, that makes sense. But what about in more nuanced things? Like, okay, let's take the lion example, and let's not even make it a fast versus smart guy. Let's make it two fast guys. Let's make it to where both of them are fast, but one guy was born with a trait that makes him slightly faster, just a little bit faster. But one day he's slightly closer to the lion crouching in the bushes. Like, it doesn't matter that he's slightly faster, which he would have to be, because you can't make a big enough genetic change to make him overwhelmingly faster than the rest of the population. Not quickly. It has to be that small change. So it's like, yeah, he's slightly faster, but he's 2 feet closer to the lion in the bush one day that he didn't see, and now he's gone. And it's like, so even when we make it the same trait and make it more nuanced, it doesn't have to be these giant differentiations. It's just you can't get selection to work unless it's overwhelming. It has to be, like you said, life or death, essentially.
So this is exactly why people who actually study the population genetics, like Ney and Lynch, they start to see what you just articulated. I'm a creationist, but I wouldn't have thought of that. The people who came up with this were evolutionary biologists themselves. Now, how did they survive in academia, given that their views are anti-Darwinian? That's amazing. I think it's just because they were so talented that they had to be respected. And if people just think we are making stuff up, Google near neutral theory of evolution. So you could, everything, Anthony did a good job. You did a great job of making an illustration, and that's sometimes way better than the technical aspects. So I liked what you just said about that guy that's just 2 feet closer. But for the reader's benefit to know we're not, just selling you a lie, if you can activate Google AI to say near neutral theory of evolution, see the nearly neutral theory of evolution proposed by Tomoko Ata in 1973 extend Moto Kimura's neutral theory by arguing that many mutations are not strictly neutral or advantageous, but are slightly deleterious. And these mutations are often fixed due to genetic drift rather than natural selection, with the effect heavily influenced by the affected population. Now, see, this is where, unfortunately you get, if you read the actual definition, it's kind of confusing. But if you actually work through examples like this and start to then go into the math, you'll actually see this is where Darwinism fails. So what's important about the formalism, we actually worked all this out. This has been sitting on bookshelves, and evolutionary biologists keep going to see. You have kind of a Jekyll and Hyde. You have one group that actually knows the truth in evolutionary biology, like Koonin, Lynch, Masatoshi Ney, Moto Kimura, so many others. And then you have the other group like Richard Dawkins that say natural selection does all this. And they can't be both right. The neutralists are a little bit more right. They fail in one distinct problem. It's like, well, if neutral evolution just happens, then how do you explain the complexity? Because that's just all random chance. So the Darwinists say, well, you have to have a way to make the appearance of design, to make all these complex systems like the eye, the ear, the nose, the quantum magnetic compass of a bird that can make it navigate from Alaska to Australia, point to point, through the night and all sorts of bad weather. It's like, well, you wouldn't expect random chance to build that. So you need, they came up with Darwinism, but then the neutralists have proved that Darwinism fails, even as a matter of principle. And so, no one is criticizing the neutralists yet, taking them to task and saying, look, even you've rightly criticized Darwinism, but you've not given us an alternative to solve the problem of design. But at least they are smashing Darwinism, because a lot of people still believe that it actually works. And one thing I wanted to, about the lion example again, and the fast people. So what happened in that example where the lion ate the fast guy, who was not that smart, and killed the guy that was smart, but not that fast. That's an example of stupid, brain-dead Darwinian processes destroying an otherwise good trait. And it turns out, and you're saying that's an exceptional case, so it's like, well, look, the one time that stupid, brain-dead Darwinian processes actually work very powerfully, and as you could see it, is when there is an adverse situation in the environment, like say some predator or some adverse situation where only, people carrying a certain trait or individuals carrying a certain trait will survive. What ends up happening is you wipe out a lot of good stuff. We actually see that experimentally now. Yeah, definitely. We see that experimentally, and I've covered that on the channel before. But I mean, basically, Darwinism works backward.
Yeah, it becomes it's not something it's not a building force. It's a reductive force. It slims everything down to just the things that pass that filter, and everything else is at the garbage disposal. And I actually, while I was listening to you, I thought of a way to, because somebody might be like, okay, well, what about a situation in which the fast guy, the guy who's slightly faster than the other guy, he never dies. There was no lion too close to him one day, and he actually manages to pass on his genes one day. And it's just like, okay, in the absence of adversity, shouldn't it be able to build up slowly over time? And it's like, no, not really, because the other guy who's not near as fast is also reproducing. You're not getting any differential reproduction there.
Right. I mean, this is exactly what will happen. They'll put all these hypotheticals. And what I will say is like, look, maybe that's a good point, but what you have done is you've tried to solve the problem with another speculation. That's not an experimental result. So at the very best, you have an unproven theory. It could already be falsified, but at best you have an unproven theory. You cannot put it forward as fact, which is exactly what Nate was saying. And in the current day, because we're seeing one extinction that actually shows natural selection doesn't work so well when there are adverse situations, there's not a guarantee that it's going to, adapt. Next, we're actually seeing, now that we can cheaply sequence genomes, maybe 1 billion times cheaper now, we're actually able to see if genes are lost in populations, which is the case. We're also very concerned that our human health is actually deteriorating over the generations. And one of the causes for, like, say, the loss of intelligence is due to brain-dead Darwinian processes. Because it's found out in modern society that very intelligent women, and this is probably even true to some extent in prior societies, very intelligent women don't have a higher incidence, like a 28% higher incidence of childlessness. That means the women who are not quite as high IQ are the ones reproducing. and it's actually causing a decline in IQ. And I've thrown in the face of some of Dr. Sanford's critics, and they don't like that. I said, look, this is data from your side, guys. And you're saying Dr. Sanford's wrong. And I'm just like, look, all the data agree with him. You're just trying to make it like genetic entropy is a creationist thing. It's like, that just happens to be a name for the phenomenon that is so obvious. And I challenged Dr. Dan, who I debated 6 years ago. And I said, can you name one evolutionary biologist or geneticist of good repute who thinks the human genome is improving? And he just gave a blank stare, paused like a deer caught in headlights. And he said, no, then changed the subject. I'm like, see, and nothing has changed.
And there's a two-pronged thing to Sanford's genetic entropy being real. The first one that you just exemplified there is that higher IQ women do not reproduce near as much as lower IQ women, and so that is what you could argue as a natural selective force, but it's going the wrong way. It's like I said, it's a reductive filter, like we just went over. And then there's just also the fact that this gets into population genetics, but it's like we don't reproduce enough to select away all of our bad mutations.
No.
They've crunched the numbers on this, and it's like on the best end, like on the most optimal end, it's something like every woman would have to have like 44 children to essentially get rid of all the bad mutations. Like you have to kill off almost all of them, and only a couple get to live, and they get to reproduce. There's a lot that goes into that. That's its whole own thing to unpack. But it's like it's a two-pronged. So like even if you don't have a selective force like stupid women only reproduce, I don't want to call them stupid. That's me. Lower IQ. I'm just trying to get to the point. Lower IQ people,
or even average IQ. Yeah.
The point. It's like here's average IQ having more kids than up here. So it's like that's still a reductive force. You're not stupid, but you're just lesser than this. So it's not climbing, is the point. But it's like, so even in the absence of that reductive drive right there, you're still going to get what we call genetic entropy just off the fact that we do not reproduce enough. I think the only organisms on Earth that are able to do it are microorganisms. Like they can actually do what's called paying the cost of selection. They can reproduce enough to do that.
Yeah. This is an interesting question, but definitely humans. And when Dr. Sanford spoke at the National Institutes of Health at a very prestigious venue, even though he got a lot of hostility, there were a lot of friendly researchers coming up to him and saying, hey, I'm seeing it in my own research. I'm concerned. I study human heritable diseases or whatever, lots of them. Just like, yeah, I'm sad to say, I think you're right, Dr. Sanford. I mean, I could definitely see the sympathy. Despite all the pushback, because it is kind of something you don't want to believe is true. I mean, even as a Christian, that it is kind of heartbreaking to think.
It's like completely divorced from the creation evolution debate. That's a dismal reality to face.
Yeah. And he actually said, some people were kind of offended. It's like you're almost glorying in this to be right, that there's genetic entropy. He said, well, look, I have a responsibility to forewarn people about the state of affairs. You may not like it, but it would be even more irresponsible to let people go on with their delusions. And he said, the only hope we have is Jesus Christ, because our genome is going to go to zero at some day. And that is known. That's a physical fact. We just don't know how quickly. I mean, we know when the sun burns out, that's pretty much it. Or when the universe burns out, it's pretty much it, but it could be a lot sooner than the timeline with that. Now, we're running up on time, and I want to honor that because both of us have other things we should be doing rather than having so much fun talking about this. There was one briefly other thing that someone brought up.
I'd like us to cover at least one or two more things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you like what we just did? I mean, I think, we get to see what other creationists are dealing with. And I
think it's a very good process for videos.
I hope you like my response to that guy saying, well, the whole worldwide body accepts Darwinism. I'm like, well, not the top evolutionary biologist that should really bother you. It's not some guy who's outside of the field. It's the people within it who are actually leaders in the field that are anti-Darwinian. And I'm like, yeah, and of course they'll accuse me of quote mining. It's like, well, look, that's not going to change the facts.
Well, it's like, I think you did. I think you responded in the best way, because what you're pointing out is like, even if they're still going to give lip service to Darwinism and say, yeah, it's true somehow, there's a million of them out there that are willing to, maybe not a million, but there's a lot more of them out there than they want to say, that'll be like, hey, there's big problems here that don't really have a solution. And then they'll still give lip service to it afterwards. They'll be like, hey, I still believe it. I still believe it's true, but this doesn't actually factually work.
Exactly. So I mean, they have to survive academia and their colleagues. But it's starting. Okay, the sentiment when I was mingling with my colleagues at the Discovery Institute, they said, well, Sal, I was saying, man, things have changed so much in the last 15 years because of gene sequencing. What we could do for $1,000 would have cost $1 trillion, 45 years ago when I started monitoring this. And so we're at the stage we can actually, people can't, we gave a lot of latitude for people to speculate and represent it as science. But now that we can cheaply genome sequence, we can actually see gene loss. And we're measuring all these things like declining IQs and not just gene sequencing, but, we're also we're actually examining the facts much more carefully. And part of it's just driven by our interest in human health and heritable disease. And we're finding all these things. And that's why Dr. Dan, who goes by the Reddit handle DarwinZDF42, as if like, okay, I could tell who your hero is there, Dr. Dan.
It's like, oh yes, I trust that username to be as objective and impartial as possible.
And he takes offense when I say Darwinist. He said, there are no, biologists don't call themselves Darwinists. I'm just like, yeah, look at your own handle there, dude. I mean, it's really kind of funny. And I'm like, so just tell me and name one geneticist of good repute that thinks the human genome's improving. And it's like, crickets. I mean,
that probably wasn't a question he'd have thought of even before you asked it. But it's like, it's very central to your dogma of, evolution through Darwinist process, building complexity. It's like, you better be able to point to something you think is genuinely improving, not improving in a niche sense where it's getting worse in all these other ways, but surviving just because of this one specific adversity, but just genuinely going upward, because that's what you need to do. And so
exactly. So if I may, because I have an axe to grind, when I started citing top researchers in the field, one of them was a colleague of my professor at graduate school. His name was Alexei Kondrashov. And Kondrashov has specifically studied the human genome. So if you had something to say, I'm going to generate a Google search term, but Dr. Dan has accused me of quote mining, and I'm going to take this opportunity to defend myself. If you could fill in a little bit while I do this.
By all means. I did have something else to say. I like how Nay said that so much of evolutionary biology and evolutionary theory that was put forward as science was nothing more than field observations with speculation afterwards. Like he said something like that. It's just like, oh man, I could not have put it better. That is exactly what they do. I don't really think I had too much else to add after that. I just kind of had to gush over the way he put that. It's just like, oh, that's a really good way to frame that. I wish I could have. I wish I had the words.
Okay, so just to show Dr. Dan said, you're quote mining Alexei Kondrashov. And I said, I didn't think I was. I was arguing, okay, so let's see what how AI, and then you could read Kondrashov's work if you want. So there are two things Dr. Dan did. He said, you're quote mining Kondrashov, and second, you haven't defined what improving means. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, I understand the game. When you're in a bad position, you're just going to ask for definitions and keep asking for more clarity because you actually can't defend your point. I know how that game plays. Just I want you creationists out there to realize these are the games the other side will play when you've cornered them. Because what else can they do except like deflect and change the subject, argue about stuff that's trivial and inconsequential. I mean, goodness, you know.
That definition game is it's why they love the term beneficial mutations, because you can have something that actually destroys and is reductive but is beneficial for niche circumstances.
Yep. So, okay, Alexei Kondrashov. Why does okay? I just asked this. Why does Alexei Kondrashov think the human genome is not improving? I said, why does Alexei Kondrashov think the human genome is not improving? Now, guys, you could put any term you want if you felt that was a prejudicial view. But anyway, AI said, Alexei Kondrashov, a prominent evolutionary biologist and author of Crumbling Genome, The Impact of Deleterious Mutations on Humans, argues the human genome is not improving and is in fact degrading, primarily because the rate at which harmful mutations accumulate exceeds the rate at which natural selection can eliminate them. Exactly what you're saying. His and other arguments, often referred to as genetic entropy in this context, are based on the following key points. High rate of deleterious mutations. Kondrashov estimates that each newborn human carries roughly 100 new mutations, of which about 10 are deleterious, harmful, or damaging. Accumulation of mild mutations. While highly damaging mutations are quickly weeded out by natural selection, many slightly harmful mutations pass through the filter of natural selection and accumulate in the population over generations, as you said, happenstance. Relaxed selection in modern society. Modern medicine, technology, and environmental buffers protect humans from the effects of these mutations, reducing the pressure of natural selection that would otherwise remove them. Crumbling or decay. Because these mutations are not being purged efficiently, they accumulate in the human gene pool, leading to a slow decline in overall genetic fitness rather than improvement. Okay, the role of sex in Kondrashov's hatchet. I'll just read this for completeness. Kondrashov did research how sexual reproduction might mitigate this, proposing that if deleterious mutations interact, synergistic epistasis selection might be able to remove multiple mutations at once. However, he generally argues that even with sexual reproduction, the current accumulation of particularly mildly harmful mutations is leading to a long-term slow degeneration of the human genome. And the war on mutation. Kondrashov has spoken about the need for war on mutation. To address this, suggesting that without intentional efforts to manage the mutational load, such as germline genetic modification, aka intelligent redesign, the genome will continue its, in his view, unavoidable long-term degradation. And I'm like, yeah, Dr. Dan, tell me how I quote mine Kondrashov, and do I really need to spell out what improvement means since you keep demanding a definition?
Well, it's like, you know what? I'm actually willing to engage in their game on this one, where they're just like, oh, we'll define improvement. It's like, okay. Let's say we have an improvement where, running fast is, the only really improvement that matters. Like, to go with our example earlier, it's like, okay, cool. We're gonna get a selective filter for making everybody run fast. That means you are now going to reductively select away, smart people and strong people and stuff like that, up to a point. Obviously, you're not going to make everybody weak husks that, can't form a sentence, because that's going to be too deep. But you're making it worse. You're getting rid of a lot of genes that would otherwise be beneficial in other niche contexts, because maybe there's a million lions running around and you really got to be fast. So that's the only selective filter, right? It's like, okay, cool. let's say after 100 years of the lions running around, something takes them out, some sort of climate change or something like that. And now you got to be smart because it's really cold. And it's like, okay, too bad. You done ejected all the smart people that would know how to build good shelters and good fires. That all those genes are done and gone. You know,
Exactly.
you already, it's like they love to point out that, oh, well, you know, the beneficial is defined by the fitness landscape. The fitness landscape is always changing, like as if that helps them. It's like, dude, that hurts you. That's
Yes.
worse for you. That's worse for your process, because it just means that now you can't even rely on one selective filter. It means that it's always going to be changing. And after you've ejected all this other good stuff, now the one good thing you maintained is also going to get ejected.
Yes, exactly. And we know this. We're actually relying on it to treat certain viral things where you attack one trait and then the trait that was selected for, then you attack that. There are actually now terms for the phenomenon we just described. It's called loss of versatility. Loss of versatility. So the guy with all this expanded set. So we kind of know this. To be specialized at one thing, one way to do it is to lose all your extra gear. It's just like a hiker trying to get to the top of a mountain as fast as possible. If it happens to be a very favorable weather day, it's like, hey, I can get there faster if I just assume the weather's going to hold up. I dump all my winter gear, all my spare provisions, and I'm going to just zoom and beat everyone to the top of the hill. Of course, if adversity hits, then he loses the race. But this is, again, he's dumping the gear. That's loss of versatility. That's an illustration of what actually happens to various genomes when they're, when the environment, quote unquote, will select for one particular trait at the expense of all the others. We see this all the time. We can formalize this a little bit more, but I think we're driving home the point. Brain dead, stupid Darwinian processes don't work as advertised. And it's a stupid theory. And I think it's stupid that people still believe it. People who should know better, people who are not acquainted can easily be fooled to think this actually works. But when you are thoughtful, and people that are thoughtful and people that know the data know that it's failing as a theory. And that's why the number one evolutionary biologist said neo-Darwinism, modern synthesis, is gone. It's gone. And so this is where I'm kind of encouraged. We were the desperate measures. We were just, all we had to do is kind of hold the line a little bit. The facts would take over. Here comes the cavalry to rescue us. I don't know. We have to find some example of that where, you had a few soldiers that just had to hold a little bit, and then the reinforcements would come flooding in. The cavalry would come to rescue us, because that's what's happening now.
You should at the beginning of this video, I'll give you the clip. You should put the "We're the Desperate Measures" clip, and then you should find whatever cavalry charge or reinforcements clip you want to put at the end of it as well. That'd be good punctuation for the video.
Yeah. So we'll just, and there are probably also examples of this even in real history where the few desperate measures held on just long enough until the reinforcements came. I'm a big history buff, especially military history. So we'll go to one more, and I do want to respect both our time. What this means is, since we've had a good time, that doesn't mean goodbye. We have to do this again. So if we cut it off short, well, while we're having fun, that means we just want to have it more to have another meeting like this. This seems like a good format then, just to go through Reddit posts. We see what other people are thinking. So, and we could always revisit some of these posts, but I expect, sometimes the same topic will keep coming up again, and we'll have a chance. But this was a lot of fun. So I'll cover one more. So there's a lot of talk about our similarity with chimpanzees. And so Derek Tyson Adams had posted argument, genetic similarity, he's quoting someone, genetic similarity matrix of apes annihilates created kinds. And he's asking, what do you guys think? And he's pointing to an exchange between my colleague, Casey Luskin. So Derek Tyson points, he said, here's an interesting response to the Casey Luskin paper from not too long ago in regards to the discovery that humans and chimps are only 85% similar. This person has extensively done their homework in this case. That person is Erica Gutsick Gibbon. And let me just show, it's Gutsick Gibbon. Gutsick Gibbon is Erica, and she is a primatologist. That means she studies apes and humans. She considers humans apes, and I'm actually, as a creationist, I'm actually fine with that. Classifying us as apes or primates is fine with me. And she says, hi, everyone. Gutsick Gibbon, Erica, back again for another beatdown of a long dead horse. I wanted to provide you with a useful resource in the creation evolution conversation, specifically with relation to the human chimp and chimp human similarity conversation. And she'll give a good fight. And this is so complex. And so Derek Tyson Adams says, thoughts from everyone here. I'm interested in hearing from both sides of the argument, particularly in relation to this individual's findings. And what I have said to creationists, please drop this argument. There's Darwin ZDF 42. That's Dr. Dan, who says he's not a Darwinist. That's Dr. Dan. Okay. And so what I said, I said, Erica is my friend. That's the truth. She was in graduate school right around the time I was also in graduate school. We were at different schools, but because there's something called shared trauma, and graduate school is very traumatic. Since we were sort of graduate students at the same time, it's like, hey, you're a fellow pilgrim in this journey. Even if you're a creationist, even if I'm a creationist or an evolutionist, we're still suffering through the system. We're kind of friends. And we became friends. We agreed never to debate each other because we didn't want to ruin our friendship. And he's a lovely individual. And I have so many enemies. I just don't need any more. And I hate to ruin my friendship with her. Now, we've lost touch as she's been in graduate school and she's moved on in graduate school. So have I. But so I'm just pointing that out. So anyway, Erica is my friend. So it's sort of hard to criticize her. I think creationists should drop the idea of created kinds as a scientific claim for now, but maybe revisit later. But they can keep it as a theological idea. Erica, like many evolutionists, make fallacies based on limited sample sizes and unwarranted extrapolations. I have insisted creationists should stop trying to argue that humans and chimps are very different. We are very similar. I look through gene sequences all the time, and I can see some proteins that the gene code for are 100% identical. We are so similar that former creationist Michael Denton, upon entering medical school and dissecting apes and humans as part of his medical training, saw the similarity and became an atheist as a result, almost instantly. Denton later became an agnostic and is now sympathetic to intelligent design, somewhat like Michael Behe. Behe accepts common descent, but insists on intelligent design. He accepts common descent because of things like human chimp similarity. So there are people on our side that we would consider as more friendly to our position, like Michael Behe, who believe in common descent and who also see chimp human similarity. Where evolutionists fail is trying to account for orphan and taxonomically restricted genes and proteins. There is no universal common ancestor for all major protein gene families. This is a major problem for evolution because if all major protein/gene families have independent origin, how did they come to be in the first place? That is the problem I would focus on. I have known this fact for a long time. And in case some people doubt this claim, Google AI affirms it. This was my AI query. Quote, all major protein families do not share a common ancestor. And this was the Google AI result. Current research indicates that all major protein families do not share a single universal common ancestor. While many proteins within a family are related by descent, the multiple birth model suggests new core structural alignments and families emerge throughout evolutionary time, rather than originating from a single common ancestor in the last universal common ancestor, Luca. Key findings regarding protein evolution. Multiple birth model. Protein families are thought to have appeared at various points in evolutionary history, with new folds arising rather than all diversifying from one initial set. I'm going to skip some of this. In summary, the protein universe is not a single tree, but rather an orchard of multiple independent and convergent lineages. I like that word, orchard. Finally, if one wants conclusive evidence, there were created. Okay, now this is my comment, I think. This is my comment now. That's end of AI. Finally, if one wants conclusive evidence that there were created kinds, then one should look to confirm evidence that all life in the fossil record are young. This is basically young life or young fossil creationism, which is a subset of young Earth creationism. Proved the fossil record is young, and therefore the similarity of chimps and humans is therefore by common design rather than common descent, since there would not be enough time to evolve a human and a chimp from a common ancestor, much less a fish into a human. So I just wanted to say Google is on my side that there's no common ancestor for all major proteins and gene families. That's a big problem for evolution. It doesn't quite give us the whole thing that we want, where we want no universal ancestry at all levels, not just proteins, but also entire creatures, organisms like chimps and humans. But I said, look, and I know this, if you're a yak, you already, if you find evidence for young Earth creationism, you don't have to make all these gene similarity arguments. Because we're different enough. Even if it's 1 or 2%, there's not enough time to evolve us from a common ancestor, chimps and humans, much less from fish. So if you have any thoughts.
My only thoughts on that is I agree that the knockdown argument for that is basically going to be eliminating the deep time spans within the geologic column. And I think there's a good many ways to do that, even though that's not something you focus on here. I'll just mention a few. A really big one is the lack of erosion or bioturbation in between sediment layers in the geologic column. It seems like a very simple thing at first, but it really is profoundly contradicting to the idea that these layers were produced gradually over eons of deep time. And therefore, obviously, anything contained within them, the fossils, would also have to adhere to whatever time spans that restricts it to. And another one is the presence of soft tissue remains across all the fossils. Like I said, I know that that's not really the focus on this channel. We mainly focus on like the genetics and molecular biology, but I just figured mentioning a couple of them since it was sort of brought up.
Yeah.
I would say another comment is there is that, I think I've mentioned it to you before and you said you hadn't seen it, and I'll just mention it again here. There is that study that was done on the Y chromosome differences between all the apes. And it turns out that we are actually wildly divergent from all of them. Like it's not, even in the best of circumstances, it's not similar at all. And the evolutionists have their own models to try to rescue this. The one that I think that they put forward most recently is, they say sperm competition has basically, there's stuff that kind of goes in that, but irregardless of the merit that it may or may not have about it, it was not something they expected. It was a post hoc response to that data. They did not expect those things to be very divergent. I don't think the sperm competition hypothesis holds much water. I think it's a lot like the iron model responses when we found soft tissue remains in fossils.
Yeah.
It was just stuff that they threw out there and now, I'll say on that, now when you back them into a corner, they'll admit that they don't have any good models that explain the soft tissue remains. Like they'll present them to you when you first corner them on it. But if you keep backing them into a corner, they'll be like, okay, these don't actually account for this, and we don't know why, but we're going to figure it out someday. And it's like, okay, you're allowed to do that, but
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you see, that they are being backed in a corner, not necessarily because of a religious movement. They try to frame the advance of creationism and like, well, they're just very effective at communicating and reports. Like, no, the data is continuing to come in, and it's always bad. Almost always. Yeah. The general trend is it's bad. I wouldn't say always. The general trend is it's been bad for evolution. It's been bad for the fossil record being old. Specifically, one reason I'm a young Earth creationist is I have seen the genetic deterioration. It's like, how could we have been here very long? We, at the rate we're going, we couldn't have been around for a million years, for millions of years.
It's like a wind-up clock. The clock only winds down unless something winds it up. And if you find it, so it's like, how are you gonna if we're only winding down? That begs the question of how did we ever wind up?
Exactly. And then simultaneously, I started to see evidence that the chemical dates, so there are major chemical dates like racemization state of the amino acids, oxidation states, alpha peptide bonds, and like a lot of the chemists that specialize in this is like, ooh, that shouldn't be there. It should have erased itself. I'm just like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm seeing. The other thing is there is insufficient variation. If you take the top layers, the chemical dates are similar. They're a little bit older in the lower layers, but not enough. And like that, this is really bad. Now, I'm a critic of, I'm a young Earth creationist, but I'm a critic of young Earth creationist arguments. I think some of them are not that good, but some of them are good. And I still think, okay, why is it am I reluctant to just say it's really that good? Okay, how do I gauge when a theory is that good? When you have a situation like an abiogenesis where people are saying we have to invoke multiple universes, or that the problems are so big we have to invoke multiple universes, in my book, we've essentially won the argument when the other side is basically quietly conceding defeat by such statements, despite the bravado of some of their colleagues who keep insisting we're moving forward and, quietly, there's dissent in their community. And then also like with Darwinism, when evolutionary biologists themselves are saying Darwinism's failing, it's like, okay, we've kind of won that argument too. I don't have to defend young Earth, I don't have to defend anti-Darwinism because it's self-destructing. We're not quite at that point with old Earth and old fossil record, but the data is coming in, and it could get, I'm hoping for the day it'll keep coming in where you can't deny it. One thing that is concerning me, and I keep seeing reports, NASA is saying the magnetic field, the holes in our magnetosphere, which means the weakening of the magnetic field, they're emerging, they're getting worse. And I'm like, yeah, every direct measurement, not some of these circularly reasoned measurements, quote unquote measurements of the magnetic field. Every direct measurement has shown a decline for like the last 150 years. And like, that is a small sample size, but that should be disturbing. And furthermore, everything we know about electricity and magnetism suggests that we really shouldn't really expect magnetic fields of this strength to spontaneously arise. It's exactly like,
very good point.
It's a winding clock problem. And we also have like, they're saying they're kind of uncomfortable with the fact that the planetary rings, and they're rings around Saturn, but they're also rings around Jupiter and Uranus. They're like, well, one thing we do know, these things are made of certain substances that they should evaporate very quickly. They should disappear, evaporate, whatever. You can't sustain a ring for very long. And it just so happens that all these rings appeared at the same time, which is just like kind of a really strange coincidence. And not to mention comets are like, well, the comets can only last maybe tens of thousands of years at most. And so why do we have all these clocks in the solar system? It's like, well, that's not proof that the fossil record is young. I'm just like, well, I would formally agree with you that it's not proof, but doesn't it kind of just make you think twice? Maybe
Well, if the solar system isn't old, then the Earth can't be. There's a transitive property there.
yeah, there's just some things like that, and so I'm like, I just want to tell my fellow young Earth creationists, look, we're not there yet in term. I believe it intuitively, and then because of some of the evidence and also the trend. Every year goes by, we get more evidence, and that's a favorable trend, and I'm just expecting it to continue. But that's not a proof, but it is an intuitive. That's what inspires my belief in it, and then of course genetic entropy, and so that's, it's like, well, you haven't persuaded me. I'm like, that's fine. Can we agree to just wait on more data? Why do we have to rush to judgment? And I can really judge where someone is if they're like, well, we'll just have to believe it because that's the prevailing view. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. That isn't science. Don't you want to be at least the least bit skeptical that maybe our understanding of things? Why are you uncomfortable that you might even entertain that the world is young? Does that kind of make you, is that kind of unsettling you somehow? I mean, this doesn't seem very impartial on your part, you know?
I agree with that. They always say that, oh, well, I'm not a Christian or I'm not a young Earth creationist because I don't see evidence for it. And then it's just like, okay, maybe you're not one that you're not convinced of it right now, but are you open to if some new evidence comes in? And some of them will kind of tentatively say yes because they don't think that any evidence is going to come in. But any of them that are aware of the trends, they really do kind of get antsy, like you just said.
Yep, very, very. So what I was basically saying is, look, this is a red herring. I've suggested to creationists, do not fight. One, I will never fight Erica. I've given her my word. In exchanges like this, I'll try not to. I might inadvertently every now and then slip, but she's, I want to honor my word to her as a friend. And then secondly, I said, look, creationists, why are you going? This is like I study military aviation. This is you like taking your best airplane and you're just going to get in front. You're going to just fly right in front of your opponent and let them just fire away at you. It's like, look, you're just opening yourself to getting shot down. And because we're very similar to chimpanzees, you cannot run away from that. And as I said, we ought to be grateful for similarity because we have organisms that we can sacrifice for medical research. Be grateful for the similarity. At one time I thought, well, God, why are you making it hard for us to prove creationism? And I'm realizing he has other purposes. One of those purposes is that these innocent creatures can die on our behalf so that we can be healed. Now, doesn't that sound like a Christian theme? So look at it that way. Cherish the design. Cherish that we're very similar to these creatures. And when you look at them, I mean, in the Old Testament, you had to sacrifice these little innocent lambs. They just kind of look at you and it's like the lamb just trusts you and love you and doesn't even know you're about to break its neck and offer it as a burnt sacrifice. And that's God's way of saying, look, you see what's happening to this innocent lamb? Someone is dying so that your sins can be forgiven. And God's kind of like piercing you in the heart by letting you do the sacrifice yourself. And, by his stripes, we were healed. By his sins, by his blood, we are redeemed. And so this Christian theme actually extends to biology. And, these innocent creatures, I never felt sad for a rat until I saw the experiments we would do on these creatures to advance medical science. And so we are very similar. I just said, creationists, stop trying to argue. You're straining at gnats and letting camels through. If you're going to argue that, because even as a creationist, I'll say, look, you might say that we're different here or there. And I'm saying I could point to so many areas where we're so very similar, even 100% similar. And so I'm just saying it's not the better argument I'm saying is young Earth creationism. So most of these people that want no universal common ancestry are young Earth creationists anyway. Very few, I don't know of any old Earth creationists that really care much about this. So if you're a young Earth creationist anyway, argue young Earth creationism, and you're done. And if you can't argue it very well, just say, well, I think the evidence is promising, and I think it's moving in the right direction. And for me, that's good enough. So I don't have really much else. We had a lot of fun. We can keep doing this another time too. So
Yeah, for real. One thing that I think, I don't know why I didn't think about it before, because you mentioned it at other times, but we probably need to do a show on those chemical dates, because that's in your wheelhouse enough, and we can go over that pretty good. The racemization and the other things that you're talking about, that would make a very good show.
okay, this is great. See, this is actually the important feedback I needed, because I don't want to be covering topics that are just going to bore people to death. And the only time I might cover boring topics is if we need enough, background to answer some of the questions. I might have to say, okay, look, this is going to be a little painful, but I just have to throw out some facts here and a little math and chemistry and physics. And then, all of this will make sense, but we need some preliminaries to be able to make a good argument. What has helped, just like in this last exercise, is we can Google AI, and at least you could see, okay, it's not always accurate, but it's like you get a good first pass that, we weren't so far out of left field. I mean, it's reassuring that I could do this, because then, people got upset when I started saying, hey, look, AI agrees with me. They got really mad. They started saying, oh, AI is so unreliable. And it's like, gee, you weren't saying that when you were using it against us. and man, they just flipped and said, that's against the rules. You can't use AI. And I said, yes, we can. So, we can, at least what we can do is we could say, look, I may not agree with what all AI says, but let's at least look at the literature that it surveys to make that conclusion. But, just as a first pass, I just want to say, look, just to keep you guys interested, I want you to know I'm not just, selling you a bunch of junk. This is, my job is to deliver what I consider first-rate science, the cutting edge. And I do think that my channel has distinguished itself from others because I am at the cutting edge. That was what I got paid to do. So, do you have any closing thoughts? I'll let you have the last word.
There was something I was going to mention earlier, and now I can't remember it. I think the most important thing on my mind was conveying to you that the chemical dates would be something really good to go over as a show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can talk backstage about when we might be able to reconvene.
Okay.
Hopefully, honestly, I mean, this was fun because of the snowstorm. I kind of had my wings clipped for a while. But I really hope the roads will clear and I will actually have some busyness to take, to work on. So, okay, so we'll look forward to a show on chemical dates. So to all the viewers out there, and I'll meet you backstage, Anthony. Glory and honor to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And thank you all for joining. Till we all meet again, here, there, or in the air. Take care, and God bless you.